How y'all doing? Oh, wow. This is a great crowd. I love the community college vibe. Like, y'all are like really here for your grind and hustle, and I appreciate that. When I go to other schools, some people just feel like they're just like there just to like, they have to be there. And so I appreciate what y'all doing here and the willingness to learn and grow. And it's an honor for me to be here. Thank you for bringing me out. I actually used to live in Sacramento about a decade ago. I'm from LA. And I came out here because I met someone and we fell in love. And I came out here, we had a kid, and then I was like, do we have to be here the whole time? No, it's for real though, it's like a second home. And I love Sacramento, except I don't miss the heat. It gets hot in LA, but then we go to the ocean and it's nice and chilly and it's cool. And here I just remember like it's already 90, it's not even summer yet. So yeah, well, today in the midst of your API Her Story Week, I was tasked with sharing with you all a nuanced and in-depth workshop performance centering and highlighting specifically the queer and disabled API Her Story, stories, and voices amongst our wide and diverse diaspora. I'm no historian, so I'm not going to give you a class lecture on the history of queer and disabled API folks in America. I'll leave that to your Asian American history teachers to do. But like they were saying, oftentimes our history is written by other people, right? And if it's written, like in academia, it's written by like white folks that are, you know, writing books and in these ivory towers. My job here is just to tell you my story as an API trans queer person and kind of focus in on a little more of like a micro level narrative, right? And what it looks like for me and the struggles that I've had growing up in America as a first generation Filipinx American. And I'm going to share some of my poems, some of my poetry and performance stuff, and just kind of hope that that lands with some of you in understanding what our struggles are. And maybe even if you know, aren't Asian or Pacific Islander or different other than Filipino, you know, there's still ways that you can understand and empathize with the struggle and what it is that we're going through. Does that sound good? Yeah. Y'all ready to get going? Cool. Before we get going into that, I wanted to share a little bit of a call and response. How many of y'all are familiar with isang baksak? Okay, there's a few of us. What that is, it's a phrase that means if one falls, we all fall. If one rises, we all rise. And it originated with the United Farm Workers movement in the 60s, if you're familiar with that. Oftentimes, that movement gets credited to Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. What usually gets forgotten is that there were Filipino farm workers that were hand in hand right there in the struggle. Larry Eat Leong was one of the leaders of that movement, and he and the community, the Filipinx and Latinx communities, actually worked together to begin what we know now as the United Farm Workers movement. Which was basically they did a strike to improve conditions for farm workers in Central California. And Isang Baksak was a rallying cry for them. Because of the different communities and the language barriers, they used Isang Baksak as a way of, you know, calling solidarity amongst each other. And there's a lot of different ways that this was used, but today I want to do a call and response. So what happens is I'll say Isang, and y'all respond with baksak, okay? And we do that, and what we do is we do that once, and we get louder each time, and then from there, I'll go straight into one of my poems. Does that sound good? Let me get hydrated first. Y'all staying hydrated in this heat? Cool. Mm-hmm. Isang. 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 1, I wish I could recite this poem in Tagalog. 2, I can only refer to the language of my ancestors in metaphors written with the colonizers' English. How growing up I considered Tagalog to be a bright neon stain on my parents' camouflage tongue, or its accent landing on my English akin to a stench of odor needing to be covered up. 3, I'm an American-born child of the 80s in Los Angeles, California, born to Filipino immigrants with 2 kids already in tow. I came along 5 years in on their assimilation train, their first American-born offspring. 4, I was never raised to speak our native tongue. I was never taught to have pride in our customs or history. In our home, my family mostly spoke what many Filipino Americans call Taglish. And over the course of my childhood, learned to say only the most basic phrases like mahal kita, I love you, or salamat po, which means thank you, or putangina mo, which is the equivalent of fuck you, but literally translates to your mother is a whore. Eventually, I picked up on casual questions around the house like, anong ginagawa mo? Which means, what are you doing? Or saan ka pupunta? Where are you going? Or bakla ka ba? Are you gay? These phrases, the abandoned fruits I managed to scavenge along the forgotten fields of my parents' colonized tongues. 5. When I was a teenager, I used to call myself a coconut. You see, I figured I had rough brown skin on the outside, but cracked me open to find all the gooey whiteness on the inside. 6, these are sentiments of a past I am no longer proud of. Thoughts I have been too afraid to admit to myself, for fear of seeing my severed roots removed from its native soil, planted in a field my parents were promised to be greener pastures for us to grow, in this orchard of land they call free, and the home of the brave, where the trees that are considered most beautiful look nothing like us, and the fruit of the fields considered most desirable never fell from our branches. 7. When I was little, my Lolo used to tell me, boy, no matter what people say, always be proud of who you are. Not a day goes by when I don't wonder if he were still alive to see the woman I have become, would he still be proud of me? Or would the word bakla roll off his tongue in slander, the same way it does for my parents, for my titos and my titas, for my kuyas and my ates? All of our relations are so painfully preceded by gender. 8. Did you know that Tagalog has no translation for the gender pronouns he or she? So because of this, while growing up, my parents' gender pronouns towards me didn't often translate correctly. And as a result of what most likely amounted to then a language mistake being lost in translation, I've been referred to as she on and off ever since I was born. 9. Maybe someday I will translate this poem into Tagalog. Maybe someday my family will get my gender pronouns correct on purpose. Maybe someday I'll see my Lolo again and I will get to find out if he is still proud of me in all of this brown skin, in all of this woman his grandson has become. As my Lolo's words continue to echo my existence, anak, no matter what they say, always be proud of who you are. I want to tell him that I am. 10. Did you know that the coconut is the deadliest fruit? It can kill someone simply by falling from the tree and striking the colonizer in the head. Thank you. Also, just as a little, as a poet, whenever I'm engaging with crowds, if y'all are ever feeling it, some snaps, some mm-hms, those are usually like, that I know that y'all are vibing, right? Makes me feel better, helps you, we all win, so. But no, I appreciate y'all, I feel y'all here. So what they asked me to do in a lot of ways was kind of just present a little bit of what are the struggles that we as API folks face in America today, right? Especially in the specific America that we're in now, and in this kind of societal, landscape that we're facing. And that poem kind of like does a broad stroke painting of what I'm going to share with you. What I want to do is just share 4 points, kind of like go into them a little bit, share a couple of poems that relate to each of these things. And then if you have any questions, you want to do any Q&A, I'll leave a little bit of time at the end for us to kind of just talk. If you want to ask questions, feel free to ask. So definitely, if anything comes up, write them down, because sometimes I do that Q&A thing and no one has anything to say and it gets awkward. And while I do enjoy hearing my own voice, it'd be nice to hear other people talk too. So we'll go into that at the end, and then I have some merch to sell if you want to support and continue reading my work. All right, so the first point I want to make about queer, API, disabled struggles in America is whenever we talk about API struggles, oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind is visibility, right? Representation. I grew up in the 80s. I never saw my face or anyone like me in media, in TV, in music and film. I never got to see, models or possibilities of what that looks like. And for many Asian and Pacific Islander folks, we don't really see a lot of that, right? And we didn't. I think that maybe there's a chance that things are starting to turn. Last year, how many of y'all saw Crazy Rich Asians? Was it good? I didn't see it. I mean, I know that it was like, it's like hailed as like, this like breakthrough moment for Asian Pacific Islander folks, right? And then I'm glad that we actually were able to get a film in the theater and that it was actually a viable film that people came to watch. And so that is definitely a beginning, but it also was like, okay, cool, but that still didn't feel like it was representing me, right? Like, it was like rich people, East Asians, non-disabled, non-queer, and so it was just kind of one of these things where it's like, okay, we got some Asians on TV, but like, that's cool. That still doesn't really represent me, right? And so I think that there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to Asian, Pacific Islander, queer, disabled representation in media, right? And that is part of why, I start as a spoken word poet. That's what I do. I go around to colleges and I speak. I do keynotes. But what I'm starting to move into is film and media. And I want to be able to get in there and find a way to tell my story that is able to reach broader people, right? More people, have a wider audience. And so that's why last month I was able to premiere the first film that I was a part of. Was a documentary about me and my daughter, Eliza. I produced and starred in, and we premiered it at Aspen Shorts Fest in Aspen, Colorado last month. And it's going to be in the Toronto LGBT Festival. It's going to be in the Palm Springs Shorts Festival. And I just feel that it's really important, right, that, okay, if I really believe in the stories needing to be seen and heard, then I need to do the work to get these stories out, to make them accessible to people. And so I've moved, I'm still doing the poetry thing, but I've also moved into writing film stories and telling those stories. And so maybe I could come back here and screen the film for y'all next time. Yeah, y'all want to come up? Y'all want to see that? Okay, cool. I'll be back. So yeah, that is kind of, in terms of visibility and representation, that is like, okay, I'm realizing that's some of the work that we need to do to bring our stories into the landscape. And what often that does is it just gives people an understanding of our cultures, right? And the idea is that when they're able to see our struggles and our stories, the idea is hopefully that they would have more empathy and that they would have more understanding. I'm sure that's not always the case, especially in today's America, but I often want to at least give people the opportunity to be changed by these stories, and they need to see them. And so I'd say visibility is kind of one of the big hurdles that we face. I would say second is the pressure of assimilation. How many of y'all are first-generation children of immigrants? There's a few of us? Okay. A lot of API first-generation children of immigrants come to America, right? And I mean, I don't know if y'all have heard the common trope of like Asian parents and wanting the best for your children, right? And like being so hard on like them like succeeding, and you have to go to school, you have to be a nurse. I definitely did not become a nurse. Or have some kind of like vocation, right? That is like that we can be proud of. And there's always this like pressure to assimilate to whiteness, to the American dream. And for me, that definitely felt true. And also, like I said in my poem, there was a sense in which like I never was taught my language. I was never given the like details of my history and what it is that made us a special people, right? And I feel really sad that my parents had no desire to pass that on to me. They came here and their desire was, oh, we came here to give you a better world. And what that means is just try to like blend in with everyone else, right? And not understand what makes you special, what makes you different. And I definitely feel that that was something that was taken away from me as a child. It was something that I wasn't given, they didn't give me that education purposefully to do that. And I had to go and do that on my own as I grew up. And that happens in a lot of Asian families, right? I know so many Filipinos that don't know how to speak Tagalog, Filipino Americans that don't know how to speak their language. And I think that that's obviously a problem, right? Because we come here and then we lose that culture. I mean, I haven't even been to the Philippines yet. And that's something that, like, I always get mad at, like, whenever I have, like, white friends that are like, oh, I'm going to the Philippines to do some scuba diving. I'm like, I haven't even been there once. So, and that's, again, an access problem, right? Like, I don't really have, like, thousands of dollars just chilling to, like, go to the Philippines. And so that is something that definitely is this pressure to assimilate, right? And it's pressure to, like, just kind of, like, not disrupt the status quo. I think that also comes up in queerness, right? When children, API kids grow up and they discover that they're queer, a lot of Asian families aren't supportive. Again, because that disrupts, the blending in. That makes you stand out. That makes you someone that needs to be, that kind of is outcasted, is on the margins. When so many of, API families' goals is to just, like, blend in and be part of the crowd. So I would say that is a huge pressure. And the way that manifests is that I grew up in a family that didn't support my queerness or my transness. And that has been a problem. Actually, my parents converted. Oftentimes it ends up that they become, very conservative, socially, politically conservative. If you didn't know, Filipinos were actually the largest minority demographic to vote for Trump. Yeah, it's not something I'm proud of at all. And it's just like, come on, why are y'all doing this? You have, like, no reason to vote for this guy. And, my parents, they'll say that it's like they're Christian, right? My dad's an evangelical pastor, actually. And that's how they relate to American whiteness, right? Like, America is a Christian nation. And so they have to vote by those, morals. And so what happens is that I ended up being in a family that isn't supportive. And I'm going to share a poem about that. And it's called A Not So Open Letter. Y'all good? Y'all still with me? Yeah. Okay, cool. Is it hot in here? I'm hot. Okay. Yeah. All right. A not so open letter. A not so open letter to my emotionally abusive Filipino immigrant evangelical Christian family 5 years into my transition, have not yet been able to come to terms with my gender. And to other families that have done and will do the same. Fuck you. Fuck your abuse and your conditional love the sinner, hate the sin rhetoric. I call bullshit. Fuck your holier-than-thou judgments and your condemnations to hell and the belief that you are the victims in this betrayal. PSA, when someone you love comes out to you as trans, you aren't supposed to be mourning them as if they died. And despite your constant dead naming, trying to bury me into the ground, guess what? I'm still alive, and I'm living my best life. So yeah, I am not sorry that my transition is something that you feel shame about. Sorry you tried to hide me from your congregation but couldn't. Sorry, not sorry, I just keep on shining. You see, this little light of mine, remember how you were the ones that told me to always let it shine and to never hide it under the bushes? Like all the times you still call me your son? Like all the times you introduced me to your friends as your brother? Like every time the force of my dead name explodes off your lips, each utterance an attempt to hide my light? No. This is a breakup letter. Yes, I never let anyone else in my life treat me the way you do. Yes, this is conditional love. I've made respect, honor, and absence of abuse as conditions for my love. Who the fuck do you think I am? I am your prodigal son returned to you as your daughter. I am the sister of whom you can't bear to look into her eyes. I am the abused fighting back my abusers. I'm the one walking away from a family unable to open their arms. I'm an immaculate self-conception of my own being that deserves to be seen and loved exactly as I am. Think of your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Remember that story in the Bible when the spiritual leaders made an elaborate plan to lure Jesus into an intellectual trap? They abducted a sex worker while she was caught in the act. They dragged her before Jesus in the public as a way of challenging his message of inclusion and love. And they pressed him about what they should do regarding her transgression. What did Jesus say in response? Wasn't it something like, let those who have no sins cast the first stones? Put down your fucking stones. Because whatever you call this right here, it sure isn't Christ-like love. Hell, this isn't even atheist love. No, this is me loving myself enough to leave your God-forsaken table when you have made it abundantly clear that love is no longer being served here. All right, let's fan ourselves off for a minute. Woo! All right, I got one more poem on that. All right, can y'all want to help me out with this poem? I need a little bit of help on this. It's at the end, the last line of the poem, I'm going to say maganda ka, and that's Tagalog for you are beautiful. Can you say maganda ka? Okay, so you're going to be like the last line of the poem. Can y'all handle it? Don't fuck it up. Yeah. It'll be like, it'll be you will know, trust me. Yeah, no, I'm glad. You're like covering all the bases. But I'm making it as easy as possible. I was unapologetically myself that day when I arrived at my parents' house in denim booty shorts, a sleeveless cut shirt with visible floral bandeau underneath, my cat eyeliner always on point, my lip a liquid matte red, my body adorned with all the dressings necessary for the battlefield that has become my gender. Of parents turned police, of friends turned foes, of stairs turned snakes, unable to understand the violence subjected on my body each time I am policed with disgust or sneered at because I dare to break out of their colonized and religious norms of gender. Imagine the weight of expectations from my immigrant evangelical parents and how they believe their son should exist. This is the battlefield I wage my wars in. I walk into their house, and I see them both in the kitchen, mid-conversation. I lightly interject with a greeting. My mother immediately looks away in disgust and says to my dad, "Anong suot siya?" Translation, what is he wearing? She says it with such disdain. The snake-like edges of her tongue hiss sharply in her words as if I couldn't understand her Tagalog, or even worse, as if I wasn't even there. And I recoil in surprise. And I wonder why I'm even there. Why I revisit this battlefield where my body, raised in a field of mines, still frequents a war I will never win. Where my struggle for self-love was born in this battle I have been forever scarred by. And I ask myself again, why am I even here? But my mother's passive-aggressive attacks got me feeling petty in defense. Immediately, I was compelled to go into the living room and open up their old photo albums as memories of their pictures come flooding to my brain. I pull out photos of my father from the 70s, of him in his booty shorts and tank tops, longer hair than I can ever dream of having. And I ask myself out loud, "Anong suot na, tatay?" with so much disdain on my tongue. I hope my parents hear it. But alas, they hear nothing I have to say in English, much less my broken Tagalog. And the only sound that exists for them are the echoes of my mother's voice bellowing out like a snake. And I wonder why I'm here again in the dead heat of summer and this war. Sure, they have air conditioning. We like air conditioning, right? Yeah, they got cable television. I could catch up on Game of Thrones. Y'all watching that shit? It's on fire. Yeah, my mama's home-cooked meals. I miss those. But is it worth the battle? I start to think, maybe I should find a place of my own and get air conditioning, or sign up for HBO Go on my own, or maybe borrow someone's password. And I'll see if maybe you might want to come over to my house one Friday night to babysit my child. and watch Game of Thrones, or maybe watch Steven Universe with her till she falls asleep, so I can go out and dance in this new dress that I just bought, that I'm still afraid to wear, with the snake of my mother's voice constantly hissing in my ear. I wonder if I'll ever again be brave enough to adorn. I know that I will, and I will dance the demons away. So when I get home, I'll ask you what you think about this dress. And in all my broken Tagalog, I'll teach you how to say you are beautiful. And you will tell me. Yeah, y'all got it. Thank you. All right, so yeah, those first 2 points, right? Just a little bit about visibility, and then the pressure to assimilate and just kind of like be a part of the status quo. Those are some of the things that I've encountered as the Asian Pacific Islander growing up here in America. And the last 2 points I want to share aren't really specific to just Asian Pacific Islander communities. This is actually something that, is a problem all across our communities, and they are highlighted definitely in the Asian Pacific Islander communities, but they involve accessibility and disability justice, and then transphobia. I'll kind of dive into those a little bit, share a few poems, and then we'll do a Q&A. Y'all still good? So as a mostly able-bodied person, I have devoted myself to learning from the many queer, API disabled folks about how to support disability justice movements, how to make spaces of support more accessible, and how to use my privilege as an able body to help those that do not have the same accessibility to resources, community, and support. I think that it's important, in the middle of our API Her Story Week, and in the spirit of Isang Baksak, right? If one falls, we all fall. That we highlight the issues that not only we face, but that we all face as a global community, right? And so accessibility is definitely one of these issues. We're starting to realize, that there are definitely ways in which so many people don't have the same access to, spaces, to resources, to familial support and love. And I think that that is something that we need to take into account into our politics. And that it's important that, whenever we're throwing events, when we're, in our classrooms, when we're doing anything community-oriented, how are we supporting disabled folks? How are we making sure that they feel welcome and able to be a part of what is happening in these circles? Actually, we need to prioritize their ability to be a part of these things. And so I'm still learning, and I've made it a point to learn from, a lot of the sick, queer, disabled folks that I know that are very, they use their platform to share how can we as people of privilege with able bodies use our privilege to make spaces more accessible, to make resources and relationships more accessible to those that are on the margins, to those that are disabled. And so I think that it's important that we continue to learn and that each of us make that a priority for us to learn. But it definitely is something that also, in API communities I've seen is also something that's a problem, and that the disabled folks I know in my communities don't have access to, these Asian American spaces or these events. And it could be something as simple as, does your space have a wheelchair ramp, right? Or is your space sensitive to people with, scent, or that can't, that have sensitivities to scents? Do you have someone that is doing translation and also ASL interpreting? And I'm grateful that y'all were able to do that and make this a real thing here. And these are the things that we need to be mindful of and thinking about at all of our events, right? Every time we come together. And while as a able-bodied person, it's easy to forget, right? It's just we walk around through the world so easily and things just kind of, part ways for us. I think that it's important that if we come out with anything again today, that we make this mindful adjustment to learn, to grow, and to have a desire for all of our spaces and the way that we interact with people to be accessible to all folks. Can y'all do that? Cool. My last piece is specifically about queerphobia and transphobia in API spaces. This is something that's been hard for me as a Filipino American. My parents have, like I shared, have had a hard time with my transition. It's not just my parents, it's a lot of, I have siblings also that are like, young, grew up here, are, still have a hard time with it also. And that just kind of baffles my mind, right? Like, I'm your sibling, how can you not understand, or try to understand what this is and how you can support me? And so there's just a transphobia that is really deep and rampant in, like in the fabric of our understanding. It's in our education. It's in the way we, teach children about gender norms and how we enforce them. And so in my film, I have a 6-year-old daughter. Her name is Eliza, and she's really cute. If you don't believe me, you can follow me on Instagram. Literally, you can take out your phones right now and follow me on Instagram. It is at JadePhoenix _ Shameless plug. But yeah, follow me. I'm trying to get these followers. At JadePhoenix _ and so Eliza, my daughter, I really learned about how she's in first grade. And that's when I started seeing, like, wow, she's already encountering, classmates that are having a hard time with gender issues, right? And then I'll come up to their class, I'll drop her off. A lot of kids see me, and they're just like, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And they're just like, in a sense, it's like a very innocent, like, asking, right? And I appreciate that they can just ask, and I could just be honest with them. And sometimes it's just like, "I'm a girl," and they're like, "Okay." And it's like, okay, kids have such an easier way of understanding, like the issues and like the ways that gender norms are like forced on them. And I think that it's really important as educators that we start our children at a young age, right? Like, why shouldn't there be education around trans and queer issues when kids are 5 or 6, right? When they're in kindergarten. It's just something as simple and easy as like giving them books, telling them stories about trans kids and trans parents. And so what my film does is that it kind of follows me and Eliza, just kind of our journey over 2 years. And one of the highlights of the story is me telling her a story about a unicorn that is born without a horn. And so I'm writing a children's book about this, and it's just kind of one of these ways of like showing difference and showing the fact that, like, yeah, these kids can understand at a young age, and I feel that it's important that we're educating them before we have to teach them to unlearn all the things that they've been taught, right? And so I think a simple fix is like, let's get these stories at a young age into these schools, right? Dealing with transphobia in adults is a lot harder and takes more drastic measures. It's something where I still experience a lot of violence when I'm out in the world. I still get stares. I get misgendered often. And it's something that, we're definitely like, transphobia is a global problem. And it's not just specific to Asian Pacific Islander communities. And actually, in reality, I think another important thing that we understand as we're looking at like Asian Pacific Islander history, one of the things and the myths, that, have you all heard the model minority myth, right? Oftentimes, Asians are pitted as like the model minority, right? We like have access to wealth and, like we dominate like tech industries. And so what I'm seeing is that there's actually a lot of privilege, not necessarily compared to whiteness, but compared to other people of color as an Asian person. And I see this mostly in my own life as a trans Asian woman. When I'm looking in the news and when I see transphobia and I see the murders and the deaths of a lot of my sisters, it's often Black and brown, Latinx, trans women, right? And that means that, like, okay, me as an Asian trans woman, I'm not targeted in the same ways. And I have to understand that privilege that I have. Even though I am a trans woman, it's not the same for my Black and brown sisters that have immense high levels of violence directed towards them. And I think that it's important as a whole as we respond to, the issues of anti-blackness that is global, how we as Asians benefit from anti-blackness, right? Asians definitely benefit from that. And if you think about just this brief history of, let's say, like the uprisings in the 90s in Los Angeles, right? And there was this like battle of like the people that lived there, which was mostly black and brown folks, and then the Asian, Korean store owners that held businesses in those neighborhoods that were reaping the money from those neighborhoods, right? And that was where those tensions came from. Why those uprisings became such a thing was, not just the other things that came about, but it was also the tensions in the community between Asian and black communities. And so I think as Asian folks, a lot of our understanding is how do we understand our privilege and understand how to use that privilege also to dismantle anti-blackness. Because again, Isang Baksak, right? My politic, what underlies all of this is if one of us falls, we all fall. If one rises, we all rise. And so I believe that, my politic of liberation is about all of us rising together. I want to share one last piece that kind of relates to this. It's called Your Transphobia Kills. And after that, we'll open it up to a Q&A if y'all want to chat, talk. Y'all still good? Trigger warning for murder, suicide, and transphobia. It seems to me these days, my social media timelines have been filled with articles containing these very same triggers. I no longer need to read past them to know that the article in question is probably another news report detailing the death of another trans woman of color, or another suicide note left on Facebook, or probably another article full of misgendering and dead naming instead of properly learning how to name the dead: Yasmin Vashpain, Kiki Collier, Lamia Beard. I don't need to keep reading name after name after name to know that here in America, last year in 2017, there were 28 trans women of color murdered at a rate that not even this poem can keep up with. I've had to change the number 12 times since I started writing this poem. You see, this is not a metaphor. This is a fact. Meanwhile, most people have never stopped to think how they might be complicit in our deaths, but guess what? Your transphobia doesn't get to be a cute, harmless pet belief you get to keep safe inside your cage of bigotry and religion. It isn't some morality you get to take to the grave and then pass on to your children like some cheap inheritance. We aren't some personal preference where you get to write us off as simply not your cup of tea, because in reality, your transphobia kills. In America, we are the most underemployed. We are the least housed. On television shows, we end up as dead sex workers on CSI crime shows or punchlines for man's laughter. In the justice system, black trans women are often the ones incarcerated in cases when defending herself against her attacker. This is a crime deemed punishable by multiple years in a men's facility. They call it manslaughter. And it's no coincidence how manslaughter and man's laughter is spelled exactly the same way. You see, transphobia is a subtle perpetrator no one wants to talk about. The monster only few are willing to rise up to. The terror no army is enlisted to fight against. Transphobia is more dangerous than you think. It is more fatal than you believe. It is more than you are able to contain when it goes unchecked in this world. Consider this your trigger warning. Do not let your complicity become the silencer covering the barrel of the gun. Do not let your hate fill the clip with bullets meant to bury into my chest. Do not let your finger be the one pulling back the goddamn trigger, or my body on the other side of your hand holding the smoking gun. This is your trigger warning. This is your trigger warning. Your transphobia kills. This is your warning trigger. Kill your transphobia before I or someone I love becomes the one it kills next. Thank you.